Chapter 12. What they know now. The next morning, Gendry's thigh was bandaged and less worrying than it had been the night before. They were in the common room of the inn in Seville, 5 of them plus Arya, the remains of breakfast still on the table. She laid it out. The shield disrupts him, she said. The contact between the pale metal and him separates the spirit from the body, completely if the force is enough. In the moment of separation, the body becomes mortal. He can be wounded. He can be killed. She looked at Gendry. You saw what happened when I stabbed him. The wound was real. He bled. He went down. But killing the body isn't enough, Gendry said. No, we saw that too. She paused. When the body is badly enough damaged, the spirit separates. We saw it try to enter Gendry, and when it couldn't because the shield repelled it, it went back into the body and the body healed. She let this settle. We cannot kill him this way. We can only separate the spirit from the body long enough to contain it. The vessel, Dissot said. The vessel, she said. It is the only thing that can hold it. It was made for exactly this. Sor's records say it was hidden in the most protected place in the temple. The passage under the chamber is the only place that fits that description. She looked around the table. We go back to the temple. We go down the passage and find it. We use the shield to separate the spirit and we capture it in the vessel. That's the plan. We don't know what's down there, Cray said. No, she agreed. We don't. We'll find out when we get there. What we know is that we have something that works against him now. The shield works. Going in blind on the passage is a risk, but going in with the shield is a different proposition than going in without it. He'll know we're coming, Gendry said. Yes, he'll probably be there when we arrive. Plan for that. She looked at the shield, leaning against the bench beside him. Old Moth had been quiet through all of this, which was not unusual since Varath, but there was a different quality to his quiet this morning. He was leaning forward with his forearms on the table, looking at the shield, and when the silence opened after Arya finished, he said, I'm going. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was the specific flatness of a man who has made a decision and is informing people of it. We know, Arya said. I want to be clear, he said. I am not going because I think I can help or because I am the right person to be there. I am going because Lura is dead and the thing that killed her is in that temple and I intend to be present when it is ended. He looked around the table. That is all. Nobody argued with this. It would have been a waste. Gendry looked at Dissot. You should stay here, he said. Arya can find you safe lodgings. You're not a fighter and will be moving fast. Dissot straightened in his chair. He had his notebook open on the table in front of him, which was where his notebook usually was, but he closed it now and set it aside with deliberate care. I know I'm not a fighter, he said. I also know that you're going somewhere no one has ever mapped, and that what happens in that temple is going to matter for every settlement on this coast for 100 years, and someone should be there to record it. He looked at Gendry. I can carry things. I can help with preparations. I can do whatever is needed that doesn't require me to fight, and I want to be part of this. He said it without defiance and without apology, in the specific tone of someone who has thought this through, and arrived at a conclusion they intend to stand by. Old Moth looked at him. Something shifted in Old Moth's face, not a smile. He was not a man who was smiling these days, but a quality of recognition. The specific recognition of a man who understands someone doing the harder thing when they didn't have to. He gave Dissot a short nod that said more than most speeches would have. We go in a week, Arya said. Everyone needs time to prepare. Arya's hunters know the path to the temple. We'll need them. Chapter 13. The Temple Passage. The week was long, and it was not long enough, and they arrived at the temple again on a morning that was overcast for the first time since they had made landfall. The sky, through the forest canopy, the color of pewter. The light flat, and even insufficient. 7 of them, Arya, Gendry, Cray, Old Moth, Dissot, and the 2 hunters Arya had lent them for the first visit and who had agreed, with the quiet practicality of people who understood exactly what they were agreeing to come back. They moved through the deep forest in the specific silence of the previous approach, and this time the silence had a different quality, not the silence of approach but the silence of commitment. They were not looking. They were arriving. The temple received them as it had before. The old stones, the organic architecture, the long centuries of growth pressing at every exterior surface without defeating the fundamental structure. The entrance as before. The main chamber as before. The passage entrance, on the far wall, half hidden by the overgrowth that had continued to press inward since their last visit. Arya crossed the chamber and stood before it. The entrance was cut in the back wall with the same precision as everything else in the building. Deliberate, proportioned for a slim human body, the symbols around its frame denser and more deliberate than the symbols elsewhere in the chamber. She had measured its width twice on the last visit and measured it again now with her eye. A little over 15 inches at the widest point, tapering slightly on both sides. She had been right, she would fit. She turned to Gendry. He was already at the entrance, his shoulder against the frame, measuring the same width with his body that she had measured with her eye. She watched him process the result. The measurement did not lie. He stepped back from the entrance. He stood with his jaw set in the specific way it set when he was holding something in that he was not going to let go of regardless of how long it took. "I'm not letting you go down there alone," he said. "You can't fit," she said. "There has to be another way in." "There isn't. We've walked the whole exterior. This is the only passage." "Then we find something, rope, a winch." "Gendry," she said it quietly. "I'm the only person in this group who fits. I'm also the only person in this group with a specific set of skills for navigating something we don't know anything about. If it was a forge, I'd send you. This is mine." She held his gaze. "Your part is out here, with the shield. Because he's coming, he knows we're here, and when he comes, you need to be at this entrance." He looked at the passage, he looked at her. "If something goes wrong in there." "Then you'll know because I won't come back," she said. "And that won't happen." She paused. "I know what I'm doing and I'll come back. But I need you here at this entrance, not in there with me, because you can't be in there with me, and because this is where you're needed." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at the passage once more, with the expression of a man who has lost an argument he should have lost, and he stepped to the side of the entrance and took his position. Shield on his left arm, hammer in his right hand, standing where the angle gave him the best coverage of the passage entrance and the chamber simultaneously. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the room, doing his job, which was the best way he had of doing this. She checked her kit, torch lit and steady, flint in the inner pocket, 2 spare candles wrapped and secured, rope coiled at her hip, catspaw in its sheath at the small of her back, water, a half day of food that she expected not to need but had brought anyway. She checked the catspaw specifically, good edge, clean blade, nothing loose in the hilt. She looked at Gendry one more time. He was looking at her now. His expression was the expression of a man who has said everything he is going to say, which was very little, and is now doing the harder thing of being all right with having said only that. She went in. The passage closed around her. She heard, behind her, Gendry's boots on the stone floor as he repositioned, and then she heard nothing except the sound of her own movement and the particular acoustic of a narrow passage that had been waiting a long time for this. He watched the torchlight until it disappeared around the first bend. Then he turned to face the chamber. He planted his feet. He did not move from the entrance. Chapter 14. The Obstacle Course. The passage narrowed and then opened and then narrowed again, and she moved through it with the torch low and her attention on the floor and walls rather than the air ahead of her. The faceless men had taught her this. In confined spaces, the information is in the surfaces. The air tells you about the space's size. The surfaces tell you about its intentions. The stone was old. Not the work stone of the chamber, that was old, centuries old at minimum, but something that preceded even that, the native rock of the hillside that the builders had cut through, cold and specific, with the grain of deep stone that had never been quarried but simply shaped in place. The passage was consistent in its construction, intentional, precise, the same quality of engineering as everything else in this building. It had been built by people who understood both the physics and the purpose of what they were making. She was 20 feet in when she stopped. The passage was not unoccupied. She had been keeping her attention on the floor's center and had not looked closely at the walls, and now she did. 2 sets of bones in the first 20 feet, lying in the positions they had come to rest in after whatever had stopped them, close to the walls, collapsed rather than arranged. The fracture patterns were legible and not subtle. Shins shattered clean, hips broken at the joint, one skull caved in at the brow where the impact with stone had completed the work a mechanism had begun. They had found triggers she had not yet identified, or variants of ones she had. She noted their positions and moved forward with additional care. She was not the first person to come this way. She intended to be different from the ones who had not come back. The floor, a section of flagstone that was a fractionally different color from the surrounding stone, not the native rock. Replacement stone, quarried elsewhere, fitted in at some point after original construction, and the fitting was good but not perfect. The edge between the original and the replacement visible as a hairline seam if you looked at the right angle in the torch's light. She crouched and examined without touching. She traced the mechanism's architecture from the seam. The flagstone was on a pivot, the pivot point approximately 6 inches from its near edge, the counterweight that would activate on downward pressure visible in the wall beside the flagstone as a slight protrusion of the surface. The slab that the mechanism would drive from the ceiling was visible above, a section of the ceiling that was slightly different in its stone composition, that had a fitted quality at its edges rather than the continuous worked surface of the rest. She measured the trajectory it would take if triggered. She stepped over the flagstone with 6 inches to spare on either side. She was very still for a moment on the other side of it. Then she moved forward. She found 3 more mechanisms in the next 50 feet. The second was a different type, a tripwire across the passage at knee height, nearly invisible, connected through a sequence of small iron pulleys to a mechanism in the left wall that would, when triggered, drive a spike across the passage at ankle height. She stepped over the wire with careful precision. Professional respect, again. The people who had built this had understood human movement with the specific knowledge of engineers who had studied how a person in a narrow passage moved, and had designed each mechanism to exploit the way that movement was constrained. The third was the most elegant, a section of floor that looked like the rest but was not fastened from below, a false floor over a 6-inch drop, the drop itself harmless but the impact designed to produce a particular reaction in a person moving with any speed, pitching them forward toward the wall ahead, which had a pressure panel that would activate a secondary mechanism above. She found the edge of the false section by pressing the butt of the torch handle against the floor in a grid pattern until she found the hollow sound. She crossed at the wall side, where the false floor was supported by a beam and could bear weight. The fourth was the simplest and would have been the deadliest if she hadn't been moving slowly. A fall-away section of the passage floor. The real floor ended, and the visible floor for a span of 2 feet was a thin sheet of stone balanced on nothing, designed to appear continuous but to break under the weight of a full step and tip whatever was on it into a secondary shaft below. She identified it by the absence of the adhesion that old stone develops with the surface beneath it, a quality of looseness, of floating, that she felt through the sole of her boot before committing her weight. She crossed by pressing both palms to the walls and walking her feet along the base of the walls, where the real floor continued in a strip 4 inches wide on either side. The torch burned down a quarter. She lit the first spare candle from it. She was not rushing. She had all the time she needed, as long as she was careful, and she was careful with the completeness of someone who understood that careful was not a mood but a practice. Asterisk. The shaft. The passage opened into a small chamber 10 feet square, the ceiling high enough to stand in, the walls the native rock. On the far side the floor ended. She brought the candle to the edge and looked down. A square shaft, cut straight down with the same precision as the passage, approximately 4 feet on a side, 30 feet deep. She could see the floor at the bottom in the candle's light, stone, flat. She extended the candle further and then let go of it. It fell. It hit the floor and stayed lit, which told her 2 things. The floor was solid and the shaft had limited crosshair circulation that would not snuff a candle on impact. The light from it, 30 feet below, illuminated the lower chamber. The chamber was small, perhaps 8 feet square, a low ceiling, the walls the same native rock. She looked at the walls of the shaft. The corners, specifically the corners where the cut stone met at 90-degree angles and where, at specific intervals she counted as she moved the candle every 18 inches, ascending, there were notches cut into the stone. Regular, intentional, exactly the width of a finger at the first joint. A hidden ladder for someone who knew to look for them. She tested the lowest with her fingers, crouching at the shaft's edge. The notch was tight, she could get her fingertips in, the first joint but not the second. Not enough purchase for a controlled descent. The notch was made for something more precise than bare fingers. The cat's paw. She pulled it and measured the blade's width against the notch. A close fit. She pressed the tip into the notch at the lowest position and applied weight. The blade held. She assessed the shaft. The walls were approximately 4 feet apart, wide enough to use opposing walls for bracing. Her arms could not bridge the full width, but her legs and arms together, positioned diagonally, could create friction points. She had descended structures more complex than this under less forgiving conditions. She sat at the shaft's edge. She turned, got her feet over, pressed them against the near wall to slow herself. She lowered herself until she was braced across the shaft with her arms and feet on one wall and her back on the opposite. The light from the candle below was enough. She descended. At the bottom 10 feet she judged the distance and dropped, landing in a controlled fall, rolling to absorb the impact. The lower chamber was exactly as she had seen it from above. 8 feet square, low ceiling, the specific smell of sealed stone space, dry and cold and slightly sweet in a way she could not account for, something very old releasing itself slowly into the air. The candle was still burning, 3 feet from where it had landed. She picked it up. The floor was not empty. There were a dozen of them, at minimum, some in the poses that made their endings unambiguous, clustered beneath the shaft with the impact fractures still visible in the bone, and some against the walls in the positions of people who had sat down when the sitting was still a choice, and had not made another choice after that. They had fallen and found no way up, and had waited in the dark until the waiting was finished. The oldest ones had been here long enough to begin returning to the stone around them, worn smooth by centuries of dry air. The most recent, she could not know how recent, but more recent, still held the form of the people they had been. On the far wall, the ledge. The tile vein had pried open was still displaced, set to one side, the hollow beneath it visible from where she stood. The vessel and its cap were on the floor in front of the ledge, where he had left them when he was done with them. She crossed the chamber carefully, stepping between the dead. She went to the ledge. The vessel, ceramic or something ceramic adjacent, the surface smooth despite its age. The symbols incised with the same quality of precision she had come to associate with all of the building's worked surfaces. She touched it. It was cold and solid and exactly present. The cap beside it, fitted stone, shaped to seal the vessel's opening, covered in the same symbols as the vessel's exterior. She lifted the vessel and shook it gently. Nothing inside that she could feel, no weight shifting, no liquid. Whatever was in it was not material. She put the cap in first, inner pocket wrapped in the spare shirt she had brought for exactly this purpose, wedged securely. Then the vessel on top of it nested in the remaining spare clothing. She tested the pack's security, both hands a firm shake. Nothing moved. She looked at the shaft. 30 feet, she needed to go back up. She tried the notches with her fingers first. She knew before she finished trying that it would not work. The walls were completely smooth between the notches and the notches were cut for something more precise. But she tried twice, both times getting 4 feet up and finding herself without the next handhold and sliding back down. She stood in the chamber and looked at the shaft and did the problem. The cat's paw, she placed it in the notch at 8 feet. She was going to need a running jump to catch the hilt, pull herself high enough to get her feet onto the lowest available foothold, and then begin the ascent by transferring the blade from notch to notch while using her feet and the opposite wall for the friction points. This was not a problem she had specifically practiced. It was a problem made of things she had specifically practiced, assembled in a new configuration. This was, she had found, how most problems were. She jumped. Her hands closed around the hilt of the cat's paw 8 feet up the wall, and the blade held, and she pulled herself up with both arms until her feet found the stone of the wall's lower surface, and she could push as well as pull. From there, right hand into the notch above, left foot bracing against the opposite wall, transfer the cat's paw to the next notch up, recover the right hand to a crack she had identified from below. The rhythm established itself after the third transfer, and she climbed with the specific efficiency of someone who has found the pattern in a difficult thing. The upper chamber arrived with the particular relief of a floor that is not 30 feet below you. She rolled over the edge and sat for a moment on the stone, breathing, her arms sending detailed information about the past 10 minutes. She checked the cat's paw. The blade was clean, not a chip, not a scratch. She had been driving the tip into ancient stone at the full extension of her weight for 30 feet of ascent, and the steel had taken it without complaint. Good steel. Valyrian steel, which was the best there was. She stood, she checked the pack, everything secure. She turned to the passage entrance and started back the way she had come. Then she stopped. She had been moving on the momentum of the task, and the momentum paused now, just for a moment, on something that had been sitting at the edge of her attention since she first came down the shaft. The mechanisms, the traps, the hidden tile, the notches in the wall. Someone had designed all of this not to make the vessel unreachable, but to make it reachable only by the right person, under the right conditions. A sealed chamber with no entrance would have been simpler. A location with no map, no temple, no trail of ancient texts for determined scholars to follow, simpler still. But whoever had built this had wanted the vessel to be found again, had wanted to make it difficult enough to stop the careless and the unlucky, and possible enough for someone sufficiently careful and sufficiently desperate. They had built a door and hidden it, rather than building a wall. She didn't know why. She couldn't know, standing in a shaft in a cave on a continent that had no name on any map she'd ever seen, with bones around her feet and a sealed vessel in her pack, and a man bleeding in a chamber above her. Whatever the builders had understood about what they were containing, whatever they had believed about the nature of it, about the future, about the possibility that containment might one day need to be done again, she was not going to untangle it in the next 30 seconds. She filed it for later or for never. She turned back to the passage and moved. Chapter 15. Gendry's Last Stand. He arrived in the chamber without sound. Gendry had been at the passage entrance for somewhere between an hour and 2 hours. He had lost precise track of the time, which was a thing that happened in situations where you were paying very close attention to everything around you and could not afford to pay attention to the clock. The others were distributed around the chamber, Cray near the main entrance, with the hunters. Dissot in the corner, which was where Dissot went when things became physical, and no one was going to tell Dissot he was wrong about this because he was a cartographer, and his job was to be alive at the end so he could make maps. Old Moth at the left wall, standing with his hand on the short blade at his belt, facing the main entrance. The Harvester was simply there. One moment the chamber was as Gendry had been watching it, the 5 other people, the light, the mark in the floor with its faint pulse, and the next he was in it, standing near the main entrance with the composed attention of someone who has arrived at a destination they have been considering for some time. He looked at the passage entrance. He looked at Gendry. He understood, immediately and completely, what was happening. Gendry could see this in the fraction of a second when the Harvester's expression registered the situation. Arya in the passage, him at the entrance, the shield. "Move," the Harvester said. Not a threat. An instruction. The reasonable instruction of someone who expected that a reasonable person, presented with the full weight of what they were being asked to stand between, would step aside. Gendry did not move. "I will not harm you if you step aside," the Harvester said. "What is happening in that passage is between myself and the woman you are protecting. You have no stake in it." "She has a stake in it," Gendry said. "That's enough for me." The Harvester looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone encountering a response that does not fit neatly into any of the categories they have prepared for. Then he looked at Old Moth. He should have looked at Cray first. Cray was the trained ranger, the tactical threat, the one with the most experience managing violent situations. But Old Moth had moved, and the Harvester was very fast at reading rooms, and what Old Moth's movement communicated was not tactical, it was total. The blade was already out. Old Moth had crossed half the chamber before the Harvester had finished his sentence, and the way he was moving was the way of a man who has decided that whatever happens to him is an acceptable cost. He came in fast and direct, the blade driving for the Harvester's chest in a line that had no feint and no complexity. This was not the work of a trained fighter reading angles. It was the work of a grieving man closing the distance between himself and the thing responsible, and putting as much of himself into the closing as his body would give. The Harvester's rapier met the blade and redirected it, and the redirect turned into a counter that found Old Moth's side as he drove past, and Old Moth went down. Not immediately. He stumbled 3 steps, one hand against the chamber wall, and turned to face the Harvester again. The wound was in his side and it was bad, but Old Moth had 50 years of weather and sea in him, and he did not go down easily. He straightened. He raised the blade. The rapier found him again. This time he went down and did not get up. Gendry felt this. He felt it without looking. He could not look. He was keeping his eyes on the Harvester, but he knew from the sound. He took the knowing and put it somewhere that was not right now and kept it there. Cray had the hunters moving the moment Old Moth charged. He was a ranger and he understood the value of the diversion and he used it. One arrow released before the Harvester completed his redirect, not at where the Harvester was but at where he would be, which was a calculation that would have worked on any human fighter. The Harvester was not there when the arrow arrived. The rapier found Cray's bow arm and disabled it. Cray went down, conscious, moving toward the wall to regroup. The first hunter came in from the left flank with a short spear. He was fast and he was good, 20 years of hunting things in difficult terrain behind him, and it was not enough. The rapier turned the spear in 2 motions and was somewhere else before the third, and the hunter went down in 3 exchanges. Alive but unable to continue. The second hunter, down, alive. The Harvester was not killing where he could disable because the point was not them. The point was the passage entrance. The chamber was quiet except for Dissot pressed into his corner and Cray moving against the wall. The Harvester was at the far side, between the main entrance and where Gendry stood. He looked at Gendry with something that was, for the first time in Gendry's experience of him, close to respect. "She cannot get back out past me," the Harvester said. His composure was entirely intact. He had just dismantled 4 people in under 3 minutes and he looked as though he had walked in from a pleasant morning stroll. "Whatever she is attempting below, she will not succeed." "Interesting," Gendry said. He moved. 10 minutes of combat had cost him, bleeding from 3 places, the worst being a cut along his left ribs that was not immediately dangerous but was spending his reserves with every breath, and the thigh wound from the road that had reopened. He was not moving at his best. He was moving at what was left, and what was left was still considerable, and he was using all of it. The Harvester was faster. This was, as it had always been, the fundamental problem. Not the rapier, not the spirit's resilience, but the speed, which was not human speed and could not be addressed by training or experience, but only by the specific advantage of the shield, and the shield required contact, and contact required Gendry to close the distance, and closing the distance meant going through the rapier. He went through the rapier. The blade found him once in the belly and once across the chest, and the chest wound was shallow but the belly wound was not, and his legs gave out beneath him and he went to his knees on the chamber floor. The hammer fell. He heard it hit the stone a foot to his right. He put his right hand on the floor to keep himself upright. He breathed. The belly wound was bad. He had enough experience with injury to know what bad felt like from inside, and his body was filing a comprehensive report about the situation that he was not reading. He still had the shield. His left arm had the shield's grip, and his left arm was still working, and the shield was still in his hand. He had not let go of it. He did not plan to let go of it. The harvester looked down at him with the expression of a man who has reached the end of a problem. He stepped forward. From the passage entrance, a sound. The sound of someone climbing. Chapter 16. Valor Morgulis. She came out of the passage fast. The return trip through the obstacle course had been quicker than the outward journey, because she was doing it by memory rather than by initial discovery, and by memory was still careful. The mechanisms were still there. The false floor was still false, but she had not needed to stop and read each one from scratch, only to confirm her memory and navigate accordingly. She had moved through the passage in perhaps 40 minutes, which was good time for the distance. The chamber told her what she needed to know before she finished standing up. She read it in the half-second before she was fully upright, Cray against the wall, right arm non-functional. The first hunter seated, dazed. Old Moth, she registered Old Moth on the chamber floor near the left wall, with the specific quality of not moving that was different from unconscious or dazed, and she took this information and held it where it needed to be held. Dissot pressed into his corner alive. Gendry on his knees, bleeding. The harvester stepping toward him. She had the cat's paw in her hand from the moment she cleared the entrance. She was moving before she had processed anything beyond the basic geometry, him, Gendry, the distance, the angles. She drove across the chamber on a diagonal. He turned. She drove toward the harvester's right side with the cat's paw, committing to the angle, and he turned to meet her, and the rapier came up, and she was 3 steps away with no way to close the distance before the blade reached her. She pulled up and changed directions mid-stride, going low, and the rapier passed over her head and she came back up from below, the cat's paw driving upward toward his center. He stepped back and the cat's paw found nothing. She kept moving. She had nothing else to do but move. There was more at stake in this room than in any of the road fights or the inn room or the night in Seville. Gendry was bleeding on the floor behind her. Old Moth was down. The vessel was in her pack and the spirit was in the body 3 feet away, and if she let herself think about the weight of what would happen if she failed, she would fail, so she did not think about it. She thought about the distance and the angle and where the rapier was. He did not fear her blade and she knew it. She had put a knife in his chest in the inn room and he had removed it himself and set it on the table, and the knowledge of this sat in every exchange now. The advantage it gave him, the specific freedom of a combatant who does not need to protect himself because damage does not reach him. He moved without the caution that fear of injury produced, and the absence of that caution was its own weapon. She found an angle on his left and drove for it. He was already there. The rapier redirected her momentum, and she recovered and came back from below, and he sidestepped with the economy of someone who has done this longer than she has been alive. He found his moment. The fist came first backhand, while she was committed to an angle on the right, his free hand moving with the precise timing of someone who had been reading her footwork and had chosen this specific footfall to act. It caught her jaw and her vision went bright for half a second and she stumbled, and in the stumble the rapier came across and opened a line along her ribs, shallow but real, and she registered both the heat of it and the fact that he had pulled the cut deliberate depth, not a killing stroke. She recovered, she came back. He crossed the distance in a single burst of speed that was too fast for a single burst of speed, and the boot struck her chest with the force of something that had been building up patience for a long time and had finally spent it. She went into the chamber wall hard. The stone received her without apology. She hit the floor and her lungs simply stopped. Not pain, not yet, just the complete and total absence of air. Her body locked around the impact, and she gasped once, twice. A ragged, desperate sound she had no control over, her chest refusing to open the way she was telling it to. The breath came back in pieces, thin and insufficient, and she pressed one hand against the stone floor and held herself there. She was on the floor. She was aware of being on the floor, aware of the pack against her spine, aware of the vessel inside it. Her hand went to the pack without thought, fingers finding the shape of the vessel through the fabric, pressing carefully, checking for the give of cracked ceramic or the shift of a loosened cap. Intact, solid, still whole. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding, and returned her attention to the composed figure standing over her, with the finality of something that has concluded a problem. He reached down, not for the rapier. He reached down with one hand and she felt it immediately, the pressure at her temples and her wrists, at the places where the self was nearest the surface of the body. The pulling, the specific pulling of something that had learned exactly where to reach. She held with everything she was, nomming herself against the reaching. Gendry saw the opening. Gendry got up. It should not have been possible. The belly wound, the blood, the previous 10 minutes, It should not have been possible for him to get up from his knees and move with enough speed and direction to intercept, and he should not have had the arm strength to raise the shield with any force while maintaining his feet. She would think about this later, about what it meant that he had done it anyway, about the specific quality of a person who does the thing that should not be possible because it is the thing required. He rose from his knees with the shield raised and his shoulder behind it, and everything he had left in his legs driving him forward, and the shield hit the harvester full in the chest. The spirit's connection to the body tore, not partially, not like the road fight where the contact had disrupted and destabilized. This was the full weight of the shield, driven with everything Gendry had. Gendry brought the hammer across. The sound it made when it connected with the harvester's head was the sound of something ending. The body dropped. It had always been just a vessel. The creature was free. It separated fully from the fallen body, metallic and black and wrong. The wrongness of something that existed in this space but was not of this space. Approximately 3 feet across, dense and purposeful. It turned toward Arya, not toward Gendry, not toward Cray, not toward any of the others, toward her. She felt it from 3 feet away, not loneliness, not the quality of an offer, not the reaching toward of something that was looking for a companion. What she felt was the pressing force of something that wanted entry, that was looking at her the way it would look at a room it intended to occupy. She could feel it at the pulse points, the temples, the wrists, the places where the self was nearest the surface of the body. It was probing, methodical, looking for the way in. She was already moving. She reached into the pack with her free hand without looking, her fingers finding the vessel by the specific weight and texture of it, and she pulled it out and held it before her. The mist was 2 feet away. She held the vessel open toward it. "Valor morgulize," she said clearly in the language the faceless men had taught her. "All men must die." The mist entered the vessel. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for resistance, had been ready to hold the vessel toward it for whatever time it took, to stand here until her arms gave out if that was what was needed. There was no resistance. The mist flowed into the opening with the specific quality of something returning to its form, a substance finding the shape that fitted it. Perhaps it recognized the words. Perhaps without a body, without the mediation of vain stolen intelligence. It was simply what it was, and what it was something that had been contained before and understood containment. It went in. She capped the vessel. The chamber was quiet. She stood with the sealed vessel in both hands and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Gendry on the floor. He was still conscious. This was, she thought, among the more remarkable things she had seen in a life that contained a substantial number of remarkable things. He was lying on the chamber floor with a belly wound that was serious and bleeding in a way that required urgent attention, and he was looking up at her with the expression of someone who made a decision and stood by it, and is satisfied with having stood by it, regardless of the cost. She crossed the chamber and crouched beside him. She put her hand against his face. His skin was cold, blood loss, the body routing its resources, and he turned his face very slightly toward her hand. "You did not move," she said. "No," he said. She sat with him for a moment, her hand still against his face. Then she stood. She checked the others. Cray first, arm disabled but alert, already working a makeshift binding around the wound with his one good hand. He met her eyes and shook his head slightly, communicating that he was managing. Good. The first hunter, concussed but conscious, blinking at the ceiling and answering when she spoke. Good. Dis-so, untouched, shaken, already writing, which was the most dis-so thing he could possibly be doing, and she was grateful for it. Old Moth was where she had registered him from the passage entrance. He was on his back near the left wall, one arm extended, the blade still loosely in his hand. She crouched beside him. She read him the way she read all the dead, quickly, honestly, with the understanding that what she found would be what it was and not something else. He was gone. The wound in his side was deep and the blood had spread wide, and there was the particular stillness in him that was not sleep and not unconsciousness, but the specific absence of the person. She put her hand on his for a moment. She did not say anything. He had not needed words from her, and she was not going to give him false ones now. She rose, she went back to Gendry. He looked at her face when she returned, and whatever he read there settled something in his expression. "I need to go back in," she said. "I have to return it, put it back the way it was." He looked at the vessel. He looked at her face. He said, with the specific Gendry quality of someone who is in considerable pain and is declining to make it anyone else's problem, "I'll be laying right here." She almost smiled. It was very close. She looked up to find Cray already moving toward Gendry, his good arm carrying his medical kit, moving with the purposeful competence of a man who knows what the priorities are. Good. She could go. She went back into the passage. Asterisk. The second descent was harder. She set the vessel back in the hollow beneath the ledge, fitting it into the space it had occupied. She set the cap back on the vessel. Then she lifted the tile and pressed it back into its seam, working each edge flush with the surrounding stone, the way she had learned to work the edges of things that needed to disappear. She worked a layer of the chamber's fine dust into the seam with her fingertip, smoothing it, until the line between the tile and the surrounding floor was no longer distinct to any eye that wasn't looking for it. Then she placed bones, carefully, from the nearest of the dead across the tile, arranged in the way they might have shifted and settled naturally over centuries, so that what lay beneath looked like nothing but old stone and old loss and a very old place. She looked at it for a moment. It looked exactly like everything around it. Good. Then she turned to the shaft. Asterisk. She walked back through the passage, stepping over and around the mechanisms by memory, and emerged into the main chamber. Gendry was where he had said he would be. Cray had the wound packed and bound with the specific efficiency of someone who had done field medicine before and was doing it now without wasting motion. He was alive. He was conscious. His color was bad but improving with the binding. She came to him and crouched. He looked at her face, and whatever he read there settled something in his expression. Done, he said. Done, she said. He closed his eyes. He did not pass out, she could tell the difference, but he let the tension of the past hour go all at once, the specific release of a man who has been holding a very particular kind of attention for a very long time and has just been told he can stop. She put her hand on his chest. He was breathing. She sat with him on the chamber floor of the old temple, in the old forest, on the continent that had no name on any Westerosi map, and said nothing, and let this be enough. Chapter 17. Aftermath. They carried Gendry out of the forest. It required improvisation, a litter made from cloaks and 2 cut branches, Cray directing its construction with the practical authority of a man who had done this before in worse conditions. Gendry objected to the litter for approximately 3 minutes before his body made the relevant decision for him, and he allowed it. Arya walked beside the litter for the first hour, her hand periodically on his shoulder, checking his breathing, saying very little. Dissou walked. He had not been touched, the corner had served its purpose, and he was using the walk out of the forest to process what he had witnessed, which Arya could see in the particular quality of his silence. He was a good person. He had come here to make maps, and he had made maps, and he had also helped stop something terrible, and had insisted on being present for the whole of it, and he was going to need some time with that. The second hunter walked. The first hunter had a broken arm, set by Cray before they left the temple with the businesslike efficiency of someone who understood the forest was not the place for prolonged medical care. They carried Old Moth out of the forest too. They carried him with the same care as the litter, and they did not hurry with him, and no one suggested leaving him. She did not look at him during the walk out. She looked at the path and at Gendry and at the forest around them, and she held Old Moth in the same place she was holding Perrin and the others, in the ledger of what this had cost. He had been 50 years old and had sailed everything worth sailing and had carried Lura 2 days without asking for help and had charged a thing that could not be killed with a short blade and a broken heart. She would carry that. Asterisk. The Hollow did not recover. This was the truth of the aftermath, and it was a hard one. Arya had harbored a private hope not stated, not even fully formed, more a possibility she had not dismissed, that with the spirit contained and the harvester gone, the people he had left alive but emptied might come back. This did not happen. The 11 hollowed people across the southern settlements remained as they were, present, breathing, unreachable. Sore sat in her chair. What had been taken from them was not, apparently, something that could be returned. It had been absorbed, and the harvester was contained now. And what had been absorbed was inside the vessel with him. What the settlements had was the end of the fear. This was not nothing. This was, she came to understand over the days that followed, actually substantial. The specific quality of a community that has been holding its breath for 10 years, releasing that breath, and not yet knowing what to do with the air. Children played outside after dark on the 3rd night. 2 small figures in the settlement square in the warm dark, and 2 mothers watching from doorways with the specific expression of people who are watching something ordinary and finding it extraordinary because they have not seen it in a long time. Areth convened a gathering of the settlement leaders. The coastal settlements sent representatives to meet in Seville's meeting hall, and they sat together for 2 days and talked about what had happened and what it meant and how they were going to live with both. Arya and Gendry were present for the first session and absent for the rest, because it was theirs to do and not hers, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Asterisk. She sat with Meryn one afternoon. They were in the room that had been Soar's. Meryn had taken over its care in the practical way of someone who needed to do something with their grief and chose something useful, and Soar was in her chair and they were sitting near her. They sat in silence for a while. This was one of the things Arya appreciated about Maren. Silence did not require filling. She always said you would be the ones, Maren said eventually. Arya thought about this. She didn't know us, she said. She'd met us twice. She knew people, Maren said. That was the thing about her. She met someone and she knew them in a way that most people don't manage with years. She looked at Sor's face, the bright eyes that saw nothing, the composed stillness of a face that had been full of expression and was now simply present. She told me, the people from the East carry what is needed. I didn't know what she meant. I think I understand it a little now. Arya thought about what Sor had described to her through Dis So, the person from the East who carried both darkness and light and could not be separated from either. I hope she was right, Arya said. She was right, Maren said, with the quiet certainty of someone who has never found Sor to be wrong about anything important. Arya sat with this. She did not cry. She thought about crying in the specific way of someone who is aware of a feeling and aware of having more pressing business and choosing to defer the encounter. She would cry later for Old Moth and for Lura and for Sor. She would do it properly and alone and it would be real. Not yet. Chapter 18. The Ford. Gendry's wound was serious, and being managed by a woman in Seville named Heth, whose competence Arya had assessed on first meeting and found adequate, which in Arya's assessment system was the highest rating available for a medical professional she had not previously worked with. He was off his feet for 2 weeks. He spent portions of those 2 weeks at the forge, which was not the same as resting, but was considerably closer to it than any alternative Arya could have enforced. She chose not to enforce. She had learned over 12 months the specific and very narrow range of things she could actually make Gendry do, and rest was not in that range when there was a forge available. He sat on a stool. He directed. This was a different kind of work from what he usually did, and it was, if anything, more useful. He had spent 2 weeks in close proximity to Thal's capabilities and instincts, and he knew exactly what Thal needed to hear and in what order. Thal wrote nothing down which Arya had noticed and asked about, and Gendry had said, "He doesn't need to write it down. It goes straight in." I've never met anyone who remembers a technical conversation in a forge the way he does. He had said this with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who has found a student worth teaching. Thal had lost his father to the harvester. He had not spoken about it except once, on the 3rd day of the forge work, when he and Gendry were working through a specific technique together, and a silence had fallen between them in the way that silences fall between people working on something precise, and Thal had said something in his own language and Dis So, who happened to be nearby, had translated. My father would have liked to know this. He had said it and then gone back to the work, and Gendry had gone back to the work, and that had been the whole of it. Arya had been watching from the doorway, and she had felt something move in her that she did not examine closely. The grief of it. The specific grief of what had been lost that could not be recovered, against the specific grace of what was being passed on that could. On the 14th day Gendry was on his feet properly, the wound closed and healing in the way of wounds that had been correctly managed from the beginning. He spent a full day at the forge, standing, working, the real work, and Thal worked beside him. And by the end of the day between them, they had made 3 things that the settlement needed and 1 thing that was just beautiful, which was a bracket for the meeting hall's door that was designed with more care than brackets are usually designed with. Thal held the bracket and looked at it for a long time. Gendry shook his hand. He shook it the way a smith shakes the hand of another smith. Both hands, a particular quality of grip that was not formal but was specific, the handshake that said, "I see what you are and I respect it." Thal did not cry. And then he did, briefly, the tears arriving and being wiped away in the same motion. And then he went back to the fire because the fire was where you went when you needed to be somewhere, and that was where. Gendry watched him go. Arya in the doorway watched Gendry. She thought, I am going to carry this one differently from the others, not in the ledger, this one goes somewhere else. She did not say this aloud. Chapter 19. Gendry's question. The Shadowcat arrived at Varathon the Bay 3.5 months after it had left them on the beach. The captain sent word ahead, and they made the walk north from Seville in 6 days, Gendry moving well by now, the wound properly healed and the limp almost gone, and the ship was in the harbor when they arrived. Its Bravosi crew wearing the expression of people who have been waiting longer than expected and have questions they are not sure they want answered. The ship was the same and different. She had spent 3 months on it crossing an ocean, and the specific quality of the space, the dimensions of it, the smell of it, the sounds the hull made at night in deep water, had become a version of home. She came aboard and walked the deck and put her hand on the rail and felt something settle that had not been settled for weeks. All right, Gendry said from behind her. Yes, she said, you. Mostly. He had his hand on his ribs, a reflexive gesture now, checking the wound with the automatic attention you gave to something that had required a great deal of attention and had not yet entirely released you from that requirement. Gets better every day. It does, she agreed. They had one evening before departure. The crew was doing whatever crews did before a voyage, and the remaining members of the original 6 were settling back into the space. Cray was somewhere on deck doing something practical, which was his mode. Dissot was in his bunk with his notebooks, conducting what appeared to be an accounting of the past week's documentation that involved considerable cross-referencing and occasional expressions of professional satisfaction. Arya and Gendry were at the bow, and for a while neither of them said anything. The harbor was quiet in the way of an evening harbor, the specific settled quality of a working space at the end of the day's working. The settlement's lights were visible from here, the lamps in the inn windows, the fires in the cooking areas, the signal lamp the harbor master had not stopped burning for 10 years. I keep thinking about them, she said. She did not specify, she did not need to. Gendry was quiet for a moment. Old Moth went the way he wanted to, he said, right at the thing, as fast as he could get there. I know. Laura would have hated it if he'd held back. I know that too, she looked at the harbor. That doesn't make it easier to carry. No, he said, it doesn't. They stood with this for a while. It was the kind of silence that had weight in it and did not need to be resolved. She was glad that he understood this, that he did not try to resolve it, did not reach for the word that would make the weight less. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes carrying was the whole of the task. After a while he turned to her. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to know as his genuine question expression, which was different from his ordinary conversation expression in a way she could not have articulated, but could reliably identify. It was the expression of someone who has been thinking about how to ask something for a long time and has decided that the time for asking it is now. What do you want? He said. She looked at him, specific or general. General, he said. What do you want your life to be? Not what are we doing next, not what's the plan. What do you want? She thought about what the honest answer was. She thought about the harvester's offer which she had been turning over since the night he first made it. He had looked at her and seen something real. She had known it was real when he named it. She had always known it was real. The dark was real, the training was real, the killer was real, the list had been real even when it was done. She was made in a particular way and the making was permanent. And she was also, this, here on this ship going somewhere no one from her world had gone, with a person she. She looked at Gendry. Both things, she said. I want both things. The woman who wants to be here with you seeing what's over the next horizon, and the other one. The one who keeps the list even when the list is done, the one who went down the passage because she was the only one who fit, the one who killed Perrin because there wasn't a better option and hasn't forgotten his face. She paused. I used to think those were two different people and I had to choose. I don't think that anymore. He was quiet, listening. He thought I'd say yes, she said. The harvester. He thought if he showed me what he'd sensed in me clearly enough, I'd recognize it and come over to his side. He wasn't entirely wrong that I'd recognize it. I know, Gendry said. She looked at him. Part of me understood what he was offering, the freedom of it, the being done with pretending any of it isn't real. I know that too, he said. She had expected something more than that, a disagreement, or the specific quality of someone reassuring themselves as much as her. What she got instead was just, I know, the acknowledgement without flinching. He had known, and he had still been on his knees in that chamber with the shield in his hand. I don't know how those two things fit together, she said, the both things, the dark and this. He thought about it. She appreciated that he actually thought about it, that he didn't produce a fast answer that would have been less than what the question deserved. Maybe they don't have to fit, he said. Maybe they just both have to be you. She looked at him. He looked back. His face in the harbor lamplight was the face she had been looking at for 12 months, honest and unremarkable, and to her, remarkable in the specific way of something you could not imagine doing without. She said nothing. Neither did he. They stood at the bow of the Shadowcat in the harbor of Varathon the Bay, and there was something present between them that had been growing since they got into the longboat and rowed to shore and walked into the hills together, and had continued growing through everything that had happened after. It did not have a name that either of them was going to use. It was present in everything else. He put his arm around her. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They stood like that for a while and watched the harbor. Chapter 20. Leaving. The goodbyes took longer than expected, which was the sign of a place having become real. They went north to Arethys first, because there were people there who deserved more than a letter, and because Arya had business that required her presence. She said goodbye to Sor. Sor was in her chair by the window, as she always was now, the morning light finding her face in the way it had always found her face when she was there reading. The room smelled of old paper and the chamomile tea Marin brewed for her every morning, part of the daily practice of caring for someone who could not receive care in the way it was given, but received it nonetheless. Arya sat with her for a while. She looked at the bright eyes that saw nothing and the hands that had held a lifetime's worth of documents in the service of understanding. "You were right about me," she said. She did not know if Sor could hear her, or what hearing meant for someone in this condition, but she said it anyway because some things were worth saying whether or not they were received. "I don't know if that matters to you. I don't know if anything does right now. But I wanted you to know that what you said about both things, about being what I am, I'm keeping it." She stood, she put her hand briefly on Sor's hand. She left. Marin was in the hallway. She looked at Arya for a long time, in the direct and without agenda way she had always had, and then she said, "You are what you are, and that is enough." Arya stood in the hallway and felt the specific weight of those words, which were Sor's words, which Marin had learned from her and was passing on because passing on was the only transmission available to her now. It was Sor saying it, through Marin in the only way she could. "You are what you are and that is enough. Not, what you are is good. Not, what you are is acceptable. Enough, sufficient, the thing that is needed." She did not have a response. She did not need one. She put her hand on Marin's arm briefly and they looked at each other, and both of them understood what that meant. They walked back down the coast to Seville for the last farewell. Asterisk. Arya shook their hands. He shook Arya's first with both of his with the formal gravity of a man conducting an important ceremony and knowing it. He shook Gendry's with the same quality. "I have been trying to solve this problem for 10 years, he said. "I sent people toward it who didn't come back. I sent people who came back wrong. And then you arrived with no stake in it whatsoever and you solved it in 3 months. He paused. "I do not know whether to be grateful or embarrassed." "Grateful," Gendry said. "Yes," Arya said, "I have arrived at grateful." He looked at both of them. "Come back if you can. This coast will be different in 10 years, in 20. I would like someone from the east to see what it becomes when it has the chance to become it." "I'd like to see it," Arya said. And she meant it. She had not expected to mean it when she arrived on this coast 3 months ago, and she meant it now without qualification. They walked to the harbor. Cray came aboard without ceremony, which was his manner. He had been offered a great deal over the past 3 months, payment, land, residency in Seville, and had declined all of it, also without ceremony. He had asked to extend his contract with the ship, and they had said yes. His reasons for being here were still his own. Arya respected this. Dessau came aboard with 5 notebooks full of maps and observations, and 1 additional notebook he had started on the last evening, which appeared to be an account of events rather than cartographic documentation. He was, she realized, writing a history. She did not point this out. It was his to do, and the doing of it was nobody's business but his. They buried Lura and Old Moth together in the ground above the beach near Varathon the Bay, where Lura had died. The grave was on a low rise with a clear view of the harbor and the water beyond it. Old Moth had asked, on the long walk south from Varath after Lura died, to be put somewhere with a view of the water. He had said it without ceremony, in the way of a man who has processed the relevant possibility and is now simply managing the logistics, as if they were already together. As if he was already certain of the ending. They were together, they had a view of the water. They sailed with the tide. Epilogue. South. 3 days out of Varathon the Bay. The coast they were sailing along had never been mapped. Dessau was at the starboard rail with his instruments, doing what he had come here to do, measuring and recording, the steady practice of rendering the unknown specific. He had been at it since the first morning out of harbor, and he was in the state she recognized as his best one, which was total absorption, the state in which the world reduced itself to the thing he was attending to, and everything else was peripheral and adequate. Cray was on watch. He moved through the ship with the same quiet economy he brought to every task, which was the economy of someone who had a great deal of practice at being useful in small spaces without making himself known. Gendry was at the small forge. The ship's forge was not much. A heated stone and a bucket of water, and a set of tools he had supplemented from what Joreth had given him when they left Varath. Pressed into his hands with the specific generosity of a craftsman, sending another craftsman forward into the world. Gendry had been at it for 2 of the 3 days, which was the fastest he had returned to working after a significant injury, and this did not surprise Arya. The shield hung from a hook beside the working wall, the pale metal catching the afternoon light in the particular way it always caught light, that quality of luminescence that was structural rather than reflected. He had not set it aside. She did not think he would. The forge was where he went when things needed ordering. She was at the bow. She had been here for an hour, watching the coastline pass. This coast was different from the coast they had left Wilder, the forest pressing all the way to the cliff tops in places, no cleared land visible, no settlement smoke. Old and uninterrupted, the kind of land that had been exactly itself for a very long time. She was looking at it the way she looked at things she intended to understand, with attention, with patience, without rushing the knowing. She heard him come up from the forge behind her. She recognized his step and his presence and the particular quality of his arrival, which was always the arrival of someone who was comfortable wherever he ended up and did not require the place to be anything other than what it was. He came to stand beside her. He smelled of coal smoke and the sea, which was a combination she had been living with for 12 months and which she associated, without having decided to associate it, with the specific quality of being all right. He looked at the coast. "Do you ever think about going back?" she said. He considered it. "Sometimes," he said. "Do you?" "Sometimes," she said. "Not yet." "Not yet," he agreed. They stood at the bow of the Shadowcat as the unmapped coast passed by them, the old forest and the cliffs and the places where rivers came down to the sea and turned the water brown and sweet, the continent continuing south as far as the map was blank, and the map was blank as far as there was a south to go. She thought about what she was. She was the woman at the bow of a ship, going somewhere no one from her world had gone. She was the woman who had killed Perrin and carried him with her, and was not destroyed by the carrying. She was the woman who had gone down a shaft, with mechanisms she had not known existed between her and the vase, and had come back up. She was the woman who had understood, standing in the temple chamber with the mist 2 feet away, exactly what it was offering and had chosen this instead. Not because the offer was without appeal, but because this was hers and that was not, and the difference between those two things was the whole of the question. She was both things. She had always been both things. She was done arguing with it. Beside her, Gendry, steady and specific and present. He had been at her shoulder for 9 months and he would be at her shoulder for whatever came next, not because she needed him to be. She had spent years needing no one, and the years had been real, but because this was the shape things had taken and the shape was right. She did not say, "I love you." Neither did he. The word was present in everything else, in the wolf carving in the inner pocket of her pack, in the clasp he had made for her broken pack strap, in his refusal to leave the passage entrance, in her hand on his face on the chamber floor, in his arm around her in the harbor, in her head on his shoulder. It was present in the way fire was present in a forge when you could not see the flame, known by the heat, by the light, by the thing the work became because of it. They stood at the bow as the Shadowcat carried them south. The map ended here. They continued. And a note on the story. At its heart, west of the maps is a story about identity, specifically, about what happens when a person who has been shaped by darkness tries to decide whether that shaping is something to overcome or something to accept. Arya Stark has spent most of her life becoming something the world required her to become. A killer, a survivor, someone who learned to dissolve the self as a survival strategy and then had to fight her way back to having one. By the time this story begins, she is on the other side of the worst of it, but the worst of it is still in her. It lives in the way she reads a room, in the list she carried for years, in the specific quality of her silence. She is not damaged by it. That is the crucial thing, but she is made from it, and she has never fully decided what to do with that fact. Gendry represents the other half of her question. He is not simple. He is in fact strategically intelligent and emotionally perceptive in ways he rarely announces. But he is uncomplicated in the specific sense of a person who knows what he is and does not fight it. He makes things. He loves her. He shows up. His identity was never pulled apart and reassembled the way hers was, and this is not a weakness in him, but a kind of gift he offers her without knowing he is offering it. The evidence that a self can be whole. The Harvester is the story's dark mirror. He is what Arya could become if she chose the darkness fully and irrevocably, not evil in a simple sense, but hollowed of everything except the taking. He recognizes her because they are made of adjacent materials, and his offer to her is sincere. Come and be what you are without apology, without the burden of the other half. The fact that she refuses is not because she doesn't understand the offer. She refuses because she has something he has long since lost the capacity for, something to come back to. Hollowed survivors scattered through the southern settlements are the horror version of what the faceless men tried to do to Arya. Present but empty. The self removed and the body left running. Her ability to ultimately defeat the Harvester, to use the vessel to say the words, to hold herself together at the moment he reaches for her, is earned by everything she survived in the House of Black and White. She knows what a self is because she spent years having hers taken from her and chose to take it back. That knowledge is the weapon. Gendry's shield is a smaller version of the same theme. The pale metal could not be worked until he stopped trying to impose his will on it and started listening to what it wanted to be. It becomes something extraordinary the moment he approaches it with patience rather than force. This is Gendry in miniature, a man who solves problems by listening to them. And it is also a quiet argument the story makes about how the best things are made, not by domination but by understanding. The love story is never named. Neither Arya nor Gendry says the word. This is deliberate. They are both, in this respect, entirely themselves, people who express what matters through action rather than declaration. The wolf carving, the clasp for the broken pack strap, his refusal to leave the passage entrance, her hand on his face on the chamber floor. By the end, the reader should be in no doubt about what exists between them, and it should have been built entirely from things done rather than things said. Love, in this story, is a practice rather than a proclamation. The continent itself, unmapped, ancient, occupied by peoples with their own complete civilizations, is an argument against the assumption that the world Arya and Gendry come from is the whole world. They arrive as strangers. They are received with caution and eventually with something approaching trust, and what they find is not wilderness waiting to be claimed, but a place that has been exactly itself for longer than their histories reach. The story does not resolve the question of what their presence on this coast ultimately means for the people who live there. That question belongs to the future the ending gestures toward. The ending does not resolve Arya. She does not arrive at peace exactly or at a clean acceptance of all her contradictions. What she arrives at is something more honest, the decision to stop arguing with herself about which of her two selves is the real one. They are both real. They are both hers. The map ends there. She continues.